I'd heard from one person that things were manageable, while another told me it was like living in a war zone. She was scared she was going to starve to death because businesses were closing. When I talked to my Liberian friends here in America, or other friends including donors and aid workers outside of the country, they too were getting mixed messages. I debated whether I should go back to at least find out what was really going on so that I could share what I was seeing with Liberian supporters around the globe. But the question of my return was fast becoming a moot point. Most airlines had grounded all flights to Liberia, and both the U.S. and Liberian governments had imposed severe restrictions on traveling there. I wasn't feasibly sure I'd be able to get back, though I wanted to. I saw an article in a major American newspaper about a riot that had broken out in West Point. The only public school in the small, jam-packed slum of tens of thousands of people had been turned into a holding center for potential Ebola victims, which was just about the worst idea I had ever heard of. Why would you bring sick Ebola patients into the most densely populated area of the country? Even during the best of times, distrust of the government was rampant in West Point, and now those who lived there were convinced the government was bringing Ebola into their community as an act of biological warfare. Residents ransacked the holding center, stealing the blood-soiled mattresses, and kicked the sick out of their community. The article that covered this riot included a photo of the indignant mob shouting at the police, and there in the center of it all was one of my girls, 14-year-old Alice. What the hell was she doing there? Our team had told her to stay at home and to keep away from crowds. Seeing her face in that photo, I knew I had to get back to Liberia straight away. Ebola was now in West Point. My girls were in imminent danger, and clearly they were not following recommended safety instructions. I called Kim and told her I wanted to go back. I wasn't sure whether the board would agree to let me go, but I let her know that I intended to get on a plane whether the board would support me or not. If I had to, I'd take a leave of absence from my organization and go as an individual volunteer. To my great relief, and not an easy decision for them, they voted to support me. And days later, I was booked on one of the few flights, thank you Brussels Airlines, back to Liberia. I was carrying 15 bags of donated supplies and personal protective equipment, which included moon suits, a zillion boxes of gloves, long-sleeve shirts, long-legged pants, vitamins, and anything else which had been collected and donated to help in the fight against Ebola. Brussels Airlines didn't charge for the extra baggage. As I boarded the plane, the ground crew looked at me like I was going off to war and might not come back alive. That look was becoming very familiar to me, as it was the same quizzical and worried expression I'd seen on the faces of my friends and family whenever I told someone I was headed back. So I stopped telling people. I knew that it was possible that I could contract the disease and die, but my insides told me that going back was the right thing and the only thing to do. My mom didn't really understand what Ebola was at the time, and I had no intention of explaining it to her. Why make her worry any more than she needed to? My older sister understood well what I was signing up for, and she wept as I handed her my power of attorney papers that would put Kim in charge of my remains in the event that the worst happened. Honestly, I wasn't scared. At least not until I boarded the plane and realized I was nearly alone, joined only by a couple of people from the Center for Disease Control. Had I lost my mind? I didn't allow myself to think about it. Instead, I began reviewing every step I would take from the time I landed until I got to my hotel room. Although the board had approved my return, they had stringent guidelines, including their requirement that I stay in a hotel, at least to start with. I was booked into the Mamba Point Hotel, the same hotel as the CDC people and major press, which included reporters for the New York Times and CNN. I had to admit that this made me feel a little safer as I got my bearings. As I thought about what was to come, I realized that what I wanted most was to see the girls and to make sure they were sound, body and mind. Were they washing their hands and staying away from crowds? Certainly Alice was not. Were they keeping themselves healthy? I prayed that they were. The airport in Monrovia was all but abandoned. One of the staff I had come to recognize over the years looked at me and said, "Everyone's going out and here you are coming in. Well, welcome home, sister." Under normal circumstances, a drive from the airport to Monrovia city center would offer a continuous view of streets that were abuzz with people selling their wares. Families sitting outside socializing while mamas cooked up a stew on a coal fire. Kids showing off their latest dance steps against a backdrop of upbeat West African music, and motorists zipping around in taxis on streets overcrowded with pedestrians. All the lively rhythms of daily life. Now the streets were hauntingly quiet. Doors were shut, and there was not a single person in sight. The only other car we saw on the road was an ambulance whose loud siren we heard from a distance. It wailed louder and louder as it whizzed past us. Emotionally leveled by the bleak scenes I'd witnessed from my car window, I arrived at the hotel. It was the closest establishment still open nearest to our school and staff house. The Mamba Point Hotel was a fixture in Liberia with a picturesque seaside view and was known for having stayed open throughout the country's 14-year civil war as an expensive safety zone for expats. I knew the owners who were waiting for me when I got there. They generously took the time to personally assist me in unloading my baggage. I'd been coming to the hotel's restaurant for years, which also felt strangely unfamiliar, now devoid of the usual crowd that would congregate here. The expat scene in Liberia has always felt a little bit like a high school cafeteria, full of cliques. Although there were now a new cohort of emergency aid workers, journalists, and CDC folks who would fly in for short stints, the same code of unwritten social rules was still adhered to, even during a crisis. I've never been that cool, neither in high school nor in Liberia. Everyone was hyper-vigilant in the face of uncertainty, and those present tended to stick to small tribes. Once I settled in my windowless, air-conditioned room, I unpacked bags of supplies and sorted them. Amongst the many boxes of gloves, I found messages tucked inside from my sister, which read, "I love you, stay safe." Trying to get some sleep, I tossed and turned for the rest of the night, from the adrenaline still pumping through my veins.